Hi, my name is Jake Williams. I'm here at the SANS Institute. Today joining me is Ismael Valenzuela. He's a principal engineer at McAfee as well as a certified SANS instructor. And we're here today to talk about some of the use cases for EDR. Ismael, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So we're here today to talk a little bit about EDR, right? Endpoint detection and response. Tell me some thoughts about this. What do you think about EDR overall?
I think EDR is becoming a very key technology within security operations, and especially as we've seen in the last few years with people adopting SIEM and doing a lot of correlation in the SIEM, building use cases. People are starting to find out that they don't have enough telemetry to be able to triage certain alerts, like a connection going out to a suspicious IP address, right? And then they have to pivot to the endpoint to see a lot of the telemetry that it's there. So EDR provides you with all of that information.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. We were talking a little bit earlier today, actually, about that problem, right? Where the SIEM or the SIEM, depending on how you pronounce it here, the SIEM is a very passive tool where we have to plan in advance what we want to log, but very often we haven't been able then to log enough data to provide all the context around an intrusion.
Right. No, absolutely. It's like there is various reasons for which you cannot feed the SIEM with absolutely everything. Like the telemetry that coming out of an endpoint, it could be it's a lot of data. But at the same time, some of that data, it's very tactical, and you never know which piece of information you're going to need to be able to triage an incident. So having things like DNS requests, like process execution, like network connections, user logons, it's critical to be able to triage and do an investigation and to figure out what's the next step in terms of reaction.
Sure, we definitely find that as well, right? Best laid plans, best laid to rest, of course, and we prepare what we want to log with the SIEM, but we often find that in the middle, as you pointed out, in the middle of an intrusion investigation, we have some tactical need for additional data, and I feel like that's where EDR plays in. It helps fill that gap and provide context around the alert that I'm actually seeing in the SIEM.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a thing of SIEM or EDR. They both play a key role within security operations. And it's about analytical pivoting, right? It's having the right information to start the investigation, then pivoting onto whatever kind of repository has that data. So they both go like really well hand in hand.
Yeah, one of the things that we run into a lot is being able to prioritize and contextualize alerts that come out of the SIEM. One of the big problems that we run into, and we've discussed this in the past, obviously as well, one of the things that we run into a lot is that maybe I have multiple alerts coming in, and maybe they're all related to phishing. Obviously, if I have one of those that's targeting the organization's CFO, I want to address that before the one targeting, let's say, the janitor, right? Of course, one of the issues that I have there is that I see all these alerts, they come into the SIEM, they all are showing machine names, and those machine names don't really mean anything to me, and I have this problem with inventory. Can you speak a little bit to how EDR helps solve that issue of contextualizing?
You're right. It's a big problem, especially as people start to use SIEM or other technologies, right? How do you prioritize when you have 10,000 alerts per day? So EDR helps with that context, right? In the end, we usually say when you do an investigation, it's all about context. You need to understand, as you say, is this a high priority system, or is just from a tier of user or a segment where that asset is not that valuable. So that context helps you with prioritization, and it helps you with being able to react to things as soon as possible. And EDR can give you a wealth of information based on all the data that is collected over time, and based on that context that will be on the endpoint, that will be harder to get from other sources.
Sure, one of the problems, of course, that we experience in industry is that as we're trying to prioritize these alerts and even identify that alert did come from the CFO's machine, that is a much higher priority alert, oftentimes we're dealing with outdated inventory data, right, that became stale the second it was completed. And I believe EDR helps us a little bit with that to look at right now who's operating on that machine.
Absolutely. The continuous monitoring piece is a very important one. And it's not just the raw artifacts that are relevant, as we say, but also the context, the time context, the asset value, where it is located. And an EDR technology can help to provide that kind of visibility where it's very difficult to obtain otherwise.
Sure. I'll tell you one of the challenges that we experience in our investigations is DHCP. And we see DHCP moving target of assignment of IP addresses to host names, that becomes a big problem for us. And can you speak a little bit to how how EDR can help eliminate some of those issues that we would otherwise have correlating that data in the SIEM?
Well, as you say, right, getting that data in the SIEM could be challenging. One of the things that EDR can help with is to run those queries in real time, right? So it's not all about just historical searches, which is obviously very important to be able to do hunting and to find out what happened with that system over time, but also real time. So you want to be able to just query all the systems you have connected on to the network right now to find out what they're running, what's the IP leads that they have at this particular time, and you will be able to get all this information regardless of whether you can bring it into your SIEM or not.
Right. Yeah, and that's something that's very critical to note, right? We may have all of the actual data available to us in the SIEM. Often we don't, but let's suppose for a moment even that we did. Even if we have all the available data in the SIEM, with DHCP, one of the things we run into is that maybe 24 hours ago, a machine with a particular host name had one IP address, and now this morning it's been reassigned a different IP address. And now I'm trying to correlate these flow records across multiple different, in logs across multiple different IP addresses in the SIEM, whereas in my EDR, because I'm querying against the endpoint, not the IP address assigned to the endpoint at any given time, I have a little bit better context, and definitely historical context, as you point out, within the EDR console.
And in some cases, when the EDR solution goes hand in hand with the SIEM, there's good integration between both. You could actually go and from the EDR solution even bring new events from SIEM that would correlate with the investigation you're doing. So again, favoring the analytical pivoting methodology that we usually recommend to follow.
Absolutely, and that's 100% critical. It's not just about a point-in-time alert. Really, as we talk about EDR, the big benefit that we see with EDR is being able to contextualize the alerts that we're seeing. Now, I do want to mention that EDR is not always a panacea, right? We run into problems sometimes where junior analysts, I think in particular, have some struggles or some additional challenges in operationalizing EDR. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Some EDR solutions, they've been designed from the perspective of we have a skilled analyst, a threat hunter, someone that, based on just having access to that wealth of information, now you can go and hunt, right? Which is great, like for many of us, but the reality is that not everybody have those levels of skills, right? And of course, it's not about substituting or replacing the analyst. We still want to train, right? We want to train them. We want to give them, the skills that they need. But the reality is that also the tools can do, in some cases, a better job at guiding the analyst when being confronted with so much information, just to pinpoint, to highlight, hey, this is important, this is interesting. Not just in terms of alerts for things that are clearly known bad, but also for things that could be suspicious, and also what to do after that, how to follow from that point.
All right, so you brought up a couple of really great points there, and I'll first kind of pivot into the into the response piece, right? EDR is endpoint detection and response, and very often we don't talk a lot about the response features, right? When I look at a lot of marketing material, I see a lot of we detect, we enable you to threat hunt, and I say, and then what? Right? The R is for response, right? So as we talk about junior analysts, knowing what the next response feature or which response feature to activate can be a challenge.
Absolutely. As we always say, detection, it's great, right? It's a must, but then you have to do something. So if you detect something bad, pat yourself in the back, but then do something about it, right? And try to mitigate the impact of that. So some EDR solutions, most EDR solutions, they provide a simple kind of capability to just quarantine the device, isolate the device, which is great. We've been involved in many incident response cases. We know how important it is to have that ability to contain an incident. But in many cases, EDR solutions can also provide you with more advanced features, maybe to run your own scripts, to collect some artifacts, suspend a terminate a process, or do some more advanced features.
Sure, and that's absolutely critical. As we talk about the response features, I agree that having those response features again or a wealth of different response features certainly can help us to choose the correct one. Coming back to the junior analyst though, how does the junior analyst, particularly if we add more response features, doesn't that make it more difficult for a junior analyst to get up to speed with an EDR system?
Well, it's a good question. I think it depends a lot on the context, right? I think EDR solutions, they should be able to provide the analyst with enough context to understand okay, so this is a raw event, right? Let's say it's a network connection, or it's a registry key added to something that could look like persistence. But now we're using the word persistence, right? That's a tactic by itself if we use like the MITRE ATT&CK model. How does that fit within the attack chain, right? Where are we? And again, back to the assets, right? What kind of assets are affected? So if this information is presented to the analyst in a way that it conveys context, it tells a story, it makes it way easier for the junior analyst now to make a decision, an informed decision on what am I looking at, and guiding the analyst into what is that I'm looking at in this particular event.
One of the particular things that we see with a lot of our clients with EDR systems is we find that unlike many other security tools, EDRs actually cross two workflow boundaries. The detection side typically would have been an information security role, whereas the response typically up to this point has been largely an IT role. Right? IT, obviously, in taking some response, takes risk for system downtime, right? Killing the wrong process, quarantining the wrong system can have serious business impacts. And we find that one of the places that junior analysts sometimes have trouble there is even if they have the technical capability to, let's say, quarantine a system, suspend a process, they're afraid as an information security asset already moving into the IT realm, right? They find that it's a little bit more difficult to, even if they feel like that might be the right role, taking that risk. Is there anything we can do as an information security community to enable them to make better decisions and help them along that process of getting to the right remediation steps?
I think it's a very fair point as well. I think it has to do a lot with getting the tools to allow the analysts, or the SOC in this case, to be able to adapt to their workflows, not the other way around, right? And because in reality, each shop, each company, each organization, each security operation team, it's going to be completely different. So in some cases, you say, like IT would say, nope, no remediation here. In other places, there is some limited response you can make. And then when it comes to maybe the re-image of a box, so that's IT. But I think that the tools should allow the SOC to be able to adapt to their workflows, not the other way around, where you have a tool that just constrains you in what you can do. And that's the only thing you can do with the tool, really.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point, right? So here we're talking about that, we kind of have counterpoints here about flexibility, right? The more flexibility we have with the tool, the more capabilities we have with the tool, the easier it is to adapt the tool to your workflow and not try and write a workflow around the tool itself. On the other hand, we of course have the challenges of the more options that I'm giving an analyst, particularly a more junior analyst, the more opportunities we're giving them to fail, right? And of course, that's not what we want. From a tooling perspective, one of the things that we found is that any tools that try to give an analyst a hint about where to go next seem to be better adopted by organizations and definitely provide more consistency in response. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, you know that for some of us, we've been doing this for a long time, you develop this kind of gut feeling, right? So when you see this, it's like, I know this. Either I've seen it before, or I guess I know what's going on here. The junior analyst doesn't have enough experience to be able to do that. So that's where the tools, as you say, can do much better in telling you, guiding you where you are in the investigation, right? So for example, we talk about investigation guides where you get a finding, which is not something that it has to be malicious per se, but it's like, hey, look here, there's something here that could indicate potential persistence or lateral movement or something like that. So one of the things that I feel that junior analysts are lacking the most is the whole concept of building hypotheses and questions that support those hypotheses. So what do I have to ask myself to be able to take the bias away from me, right, that everybody has, and make a good, consistent, thorough investigation. And tools can help with that too by providing this help, making sure the junior analyst can ask the right questions as he goes or she goes through the investigation.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? So basically, as we talk about this, what we're really talking about here, and forgive me for if I'm paraphrasing it correctly here, but it's really an expert knowledge system.
Absolutely.
And providing a decision support system, in particular to our junior analysts, right? So wrapping up the years of experience or decades of experience, right, that our senior information security professionals have, and arming our junior analysts with those, as you point out, falsifiable hypotheses, right? That they can come in and test and say, did this happen or did it not? And again, an EDR system allows us to do that. It's very interesting that from, as we look at a SIEM, typically we don't have the ability, or it's not as easy to come up with those hypotheses, right? Because either you had the data or not, as opposed to being a very passive system, as opposed to EDR being very active.
Yep, absolutely. So again, I think this plays for both tools. It's just a matter of knowing how to leverage them to follow your workflows. And in many occasions, we're going to see like people looking at the SIEM, finding some alert, and then, as we said before, going deep into the endpoint, and then using that information to also correlate other artifacts they find from their investigation. Maybe the EDR taking some automated action to at least quarantine while the situation is well assessed, scoped, where it's something that EDR can help too, together with some other information you can get maybe from the network or other tactical sources that might be going into the SIEM. Once you have the full picture, do the full response and remediation, depending on what you found.
Sure. To borrow a military analogy, we often find, or we often talk about EDR, at least internally at my organization, we talk about it as being a force multiplier, right? It's a tool that allows a single analyst or a small team of analysts to project force in a way that they wouldn't be able to without that tool, because of course, again, they have the ability to perform the active queries. As you pointed out, that quarantine during that triage assessment is absolutely critical. I think back to a number of ransomware cases that we've worked and that we've seen where there are early indications early on in the investigation that something's amiss here. IT is seeing it, IT security is seeing it, and they don't have the ready-to-go remediation actions to go, let's quarantine this subnet, let's take these systems off. We know that this particular process is related to the ransomware. Kill this process everywhere we see it across the enterprise. And if they lack that tooling, that can turn a small incident into a very large incident very quickly.
Right, absolutely. Find out which DLL or what DLL or what system is running this DLL, right? More appropriately in my environment, or what machine is soliciting this connection, or that kind of visibility and the flexibility to do that. It's important.
A scenario that we've talked about in the past here too actually involves network traffic, and this is a very common alert that we get on the SIEM. Where we see a outbound connection to a known malicious site or suspected malicious website, let's say, or domain name or IP address that we've identified through threat intelligence, and we've got that alert, and we can tie that back to a system, and that's great. But can you speak a little bit to how EDR can really contextualize that alert on that system?
Yeah, usually when you follow that kind of workflow, the investigation stops there. So you could potentially maybe take a snapshot of the machine, right? Find out what's running there. Problem is that you're not going to find what was running before in the past. So both things are important, right? You want to know what's running right now on the system, but you also want to see what was running before for the last, 24 hours, 48 hours, or even go hunting for specific IOCs, and bring that into some kind of investigation window where you can now start mapping artifacts, building relationships. In some cases, using reputational sources to find out what you know about some specific artifact. And that helps junior analysts to start painting the picture of what's going on in my organization.
Yeah, definitely. And to that point, right, a problem that we run into a lot is alert fatigue, right? And so here in a particular scenario, let's say we've got that reputational hit on a domain name or an IP address, and it's one of, let's say, 100 alerts that we got today. Maybe one of my analysts picks that up in 6, 7, 8 hours, right? They go then over to the system and try to get some information about the system, and the connection's no longer active, right? Speaking back to EDR, and maybe even doing some automation around that, maybe the alert pivots into the EDR system to go query data from the system live, right?
Absolutely.
And then, of course, that gives us additional context.
And especially these days with the techniques that we know that are being used, like living off the land techniques, where there's no clear like black or white, good or wrong. It's all like gray, right? So it's on the details, it's on the command lines, it's on the kind of artifacts that are being used, how what DLLs are being loaded into each process. So you have to have the granularity and that kind of level of visibility to be able to figure out, is this a false positive or is this something I'm really concerned with?
I love your example of talking about DLLs on the system, and I couldn't come up with a better EDR use case than that. And by the way, we didn't rehearse this at all about the DLLs. This is so perfect. when we talk about DLLs on the system, this is an example of data that we couldn't possibly log for every system running on the network. It's very, very rare in the case of a SIEM to even have process level auditing, let alone DLL level auditing for all my workstations in a network. It's very, very rare for that to even be forwarded to the SIEM. It's simply too much to look at the individual DLLs in a process. But once we identify one that we believe to be malicious or otherwise suspicious, I now need to rapidly find out where else in the network is that at. And this simply is a question the SIEM isn't going to be able to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you look at the open source tools that are available, and that we teach in this SANS classes as well about to do red teaming and penetration testing. Many of them, like Empire, PowerShell, you can just embed one of those DLLs into a legitimate process. Unless you have the granularity of looking at all DLLs that are loaded there, you're not going to see this the evidence of the potential command and control, the process that is running the command and control. And that's something that is available to everybody. Everybody can use it. So of course, more advanced actors would also be using those techniques and even more advanced ones.
Sure, and this isn't just an example of advanced attackers necessarily. This afternoon, I'll be teaching 25 students here again how to do DLL side loading, as well as how to use PowerShell Empire specifically, right? So you gave two great examples here of, we're walking out now with 25 new red teamers, red teamers, penetration testers, et cetera, who have these skills to go into these environments. And of course, if we're teaching that here on day 2 of a class, you can imagine that there are far more advanced techniques that attackers are using that, again, absent an EDR, absent something that we can actively query for those indicators of compromise, I feel like we're hunting in the blind a little bit, purely relying on the SIEM.
Absolutely. And talking about now how to leverage that, in the end, what we want to build is better resilience, right? Better shorten the time to detection and reaction to be able to mitigate impact. And EDR tools can help you also to provide some of these metrics. For example, like how you're doing in terms of how long does it take you to conduct an investigation, the quality of the investigation, things that will help you to move the needle, right? Or at least the SOC manager or the C-level executives to move the needle in the right direction, which is ultimately the end goal, right, of security operations.
Yeah, we talk a lot about mean time to detection and mean time to response as being two very important cybersecurity metrics. And a very good evaluation of the quality of a cybersecurity program. Very often I find particularly folks will anchor on mean time to detection. Do you have any thoughts on why they're anchoring on mean time to detection and not mean time to response?
That's a good question. The problem with mean time to detection is it sounds like a great metric to have, and it is. The problem is that it forces you to have forensic capabilities, which not everybody has. Right. Because you need to understand when that artifact was first landed on the system. And again, that's something else that EDR solutions can help with. But if you detect, you do a good job at that, doing the forensics, all the advanced stuff, but again, you don't have the ability to remediate and to do this in an orchestrated way, in a way that is integrated with the rest of your ecosystem, in a safe way as well too, then there's no purpose, right? Because it's all a life cycle. So you want to detect, you want to react, then you want to build better prevention and detection, right, with the rest of the tools that you have in the SOC to again, minimize risk. Sure,
we often analogize when we talk about mean time to detection as being our only metric, right? I like to analogize it to law enforcement, right? And for instance, maybe there's a mugging out on the street and a police officer says, hey, wow, look at that, that's bad. And then stands there and does nothing, right? And of course, we don't do that in cybersecurity. We want to have those, as you mentioned, the ability to react. And I often find when we're reviewing programs, cybersecurity programs for our clients, that they often focus on mean time to detection because it's an easier metric for them to collect. Right. Because they have a SIEM, but they haven't invested in any orchestrated response, as you talked about. And as a result, their response numbers are being self-reported. They're relying on IT to say this is how long it took us to do that response. Right? Those numbers obviously get fudged. Right? There's a lot of subjectivity in those numbers. I find that clients that have EDR systems and that have orchestrated the actions between detection and response, I find they have much better mean time to response metrics. Not only the metrics themselves are lower, but that the quality of the numbers that they're providing are better.
Right. Absolutely. Totally agree.
Well, do you have any other thoughts here about EDR, or do you want to wrap this up? What do you think?
Well, thanks for having me. I think it was awesome. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thanks
No, this has been phenomenal, and I really appreciate you coming out and contributing this information back to the SANS community.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.